The perfect card in an early PC for retro gaming is of course an AdLib sound card. Unfortunately, they are pretty much impossible to find nowadays, and even if you can find one, prices are pretty silly. A better option is to build a replica card, and we have done so for a couple of projects on this channel. Unfortunately, modern PCBs look quite different from what they did back in the 80s, so the replica cards don't quite have the period correct look and feel. However, I think I might have found a solution for this. On today's video, we're going to try out some new PCBs from PCBWay and restore a matching IBM 5150. This IBM has been in storage for a very long time, so I don't really remember anything about this machine. We're gonna have to explore it together, but to begin with, it's exceptionally grimy. So there's going to be a lot of scrubbing for me to get this machine back to a nice condition. Oh, this is actually an early machine. You can tell because they added a few more screws up here very early in the production, but it's not early enough to have the black power supply. And it also has one early black bracket card here, so that's a match too for an early machine. And then we have one graphics card with two black connectors, so if we're lucky, that is an original Hercules card. And unfortunately the previous owner kept two of the cards, so that's a bummer. It has some leftovers from stickers and some nasty goo here. Yuck. But let's get inside and see what we're up against. These large bolt head screws here are 1/4 inch bolt head screws. And since it's an early machine, it only has 2 screws at the back. I'm gonna scrape this glue off before I remove the lid. This way the case isn't so flimsy. I'll just use some IPA and scrape it off with a spudger, because the spudger is made out of a very soft plastic, so it doesn't scratch up the paint job. That's much better. I removed some more glue up here, and hopefully the remaining grime here will come off with some warm soapy water later. Okay, moment of truth. What will we find inside here? Oh, that is actually not a serial card as I thought. This is a much bigger card, so that's interesting. Large black bracket mystery card. Well, at least the previous owner left the screws in when he snatched those 2 other cards. Okay, let's pull this guy out and see what it is. Ooh, it has a nasty Varda, but luckily this guy here hasn't leaked. Not as far as I can tell at least. So this is one lucky IBM for sure. Okay, so we've got a battery and a whole bunch of RAM chips here. And down here it says quad board. Never seen one of these before. There's some more text in the silk screen here, but I can't quite make out what it says. So, from what I can see here, it looks to be something similar to an AST 6-pack Plus. I'll check on Google and get back to this card later. We've got some nasty little tantalums ready to blow up. Okay, I managed to decipher the silk screen here, and it says Quadram Corp. So apparently this is a Quadram Corp quad board. Normal cards in IBM 5150s have these regular chrome brackets, but early cards like this one here has black brackets. So this quad card here is a perfect match for an early IBM 5150. Oh, the nasty little Varda juice has actually started to seep out from the battery here, but strangely enough on top of the card. So I wonder if it was stored upside down by the previous owner. So we're incredibly lucky here. This is nothing compared to what we have seen in some machines. And same thing on this side of the PCB. There is actually some damage to this trace here, but this is minimal, so we can definitely fix this card. But as you can see, the trace is corroded. And again, strangely enough, on top of the card. So it must have been stored upside down before I got this machine. Okay, I did an inspection, but I can't see any damage to the motherboard. So this is one lucky machine for sure. And as expected, it's a 16 to 64K board. Okay, and the date codes on the chips are from 1982. So definitely an early machine. This board was made just a few months after the introduction in August of 1981. Okay, let's check out that graphics card next. And see if it is Hercules card. And it is. Awesome. Wow, this machine is a really nice find. A super early machine with an original Hercules card and a black bracket mystery card and a Varda battery that has barely leaked. But I think this card is a later upgrade, because my other Hercules card looks much older than this card. Let's check those dates. Yeah, 1986. So this is a much later upgrade. So what I think we'll do here is that we'll test this card and then we'll swap it for that early card for a perfect match in this machine. This card can go into a slightly newer IBM. And the next card is a no-brainer. It's the standard floppy controller installed in every IBM 5150. This machine also has a blue ribbon cable, so I think that's a match for an early machine too. Later machines came with grey cables. Yeah, just a standard floppy controller. Nothing interesting to say here. It has two tantalum caps here that we need to replace, otherwise they're gonna go bang, especially in an early machine like this. This machine is absolutely disgusting. It's pretty much as bad on the inside here as on the outside. And it has been a home for spiders too. So we're gonna have to go for a complete disassembly and wash every single part. Okay, I did a visual inspection of the two drives. The tantalums have not blown yet. And this drive here has chips from 1984, so this drive has unfortunately been replaced. So how about the door, which very often breaks on these? No, they are still okay. Awesome. I'm a bit surprised that it doesn't have a black power supply, but maybe those early power supplies only lasted for a couple of months. Or perhaps it's replaced, like this floppy drive here. Let's pull that ribbon cable off and pull that drive out. There isn't quite room enough for the nut driver to remove the other drive, so we need to remove the speaker first. And now we can reach this last screw here and pull this drive out too. All the RAM chips have matching dates, so this is probably the configuration it was sold with. But they have a small green dot, so I wonder if someone has been troubleshooting this machine. I guess we need to check underneath and see if we can spot a repair. The motherboard is held in place with just two screws. One at the back here and one screw on the front here. And then some really annoying plastic tabs that tend to get jammed and almost impossible to remove sometimes. This one wasn't too bad actually. Yeah, this machine definitely needs a warm bath. And the last thing to come out is the non-black power supply. And hopefully someone who knows will leave a comment and tell us when they switched from black to chromed power supplies. Underneath the power supply, the chassis is stamped 13N1. So is that week 13 of 1981. But aside from that dust, I think it's in a pretty good condition. And same thing underneath here. The paint job is in a pretty good condition, so this machine seems to have been stored really well. The power supply has a couple of security screws, and the rest is 1/4 inch bolt head screws. And my usual disclaimer, please don't mess around inside power supplies. Some of the caps inside could be charged with mains voltage, even with the cord unplugged. Okay, let's see what we will find inside this dusty power supply. Maybe a very smelly surprise. Yeah, check out these nasty little refills here, two of them, and they are of course cracked, ready to go bang. So if we had turned the power on, these two guys would have gone bang, and I would have had a very nasty smell in the studio for weeks to come. So we're gonna have to replace these. The IC connectors are soldered to the PCBs, so I'm gonna try to replace these without doing a complete disassembly. And the nasty little refills are installed on a separate PCB here. Okay, I can just about reach the third screw here, although it's going to be a pain to reinstall. Okay, so we can replace the refills without taking this board out completely. Same thing with some of the other screws. but luckily I found this extra long socket, so maybe the reassembly will be a little bit easier. Some tools are so rarely used, I don't even remember that I had one. I'm going to remove all the screws on the lower PCB too, to get better access when I wash the power supply, but I'm not going to remove it completely. Yeah, this should be enough for a proper wash. Before the wash, I'm going to remove the nasty little refus. So I'll apply some fresh solder first, and then I'm going to unbend the legs. And now we can remove the solder with the desoldering gun. And off you go, little refa. The last thing we need to do before the wash is to remove that nasty Varda. I have seen many Vardas, but never this type here. Apparently this is a Varda Softronic, 100 mA, 2.4 volts. But it doesn't actually say what type it is, so I'm gonna have to Google this to find a suitable replacement. I'll start by adding some fresh solder to all the pins. It's a rather unusual PCB, by the way. It has square vias instead of the usual round. I can't imagine why square vias would be better than round ones. Actually, most, but not all, of the through holes are square too. What a strange PCB. The legs on this battery barely fits in the through holes, so it is kind of jammed in here, even with all the solder removed. And off you go, little Varda. Underneath the battery we can clearly see that the battery has leaked and there is some damage here. But this is really minimal, so this shouldn't be too hard to fix. What an incredibly lucky card. Okay, all the parts have been washed, and while they dry, let's check out the new PCBs for the AdLib sound card. So I already have a couple of AdLib Replica cards in my vintage machines. But I have a little issue, not only with the AdLib replicas, but also with other projects in my vintage PCs. If we take a look at this replica and compare it with the original card, it doesn't have the right look and feel when using a regular modern green PCB. So when I was ordering new PCBs the other day from the sponsor of this video, PCB Away, as I often do, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. Check out this option here. Aside from the usual green, they also offer matte green PCBs. So I'm thinking maybe these boards look more like PCBs did back in the 80s. I haven't peeked yet, so let's check them out together. Well, they are definitely less green than the modern alternative, and I can already tell they look more similar to the original card. Yeah, these look great. These are some really good looking PCBs for sure. Let me adjust that camera. Well, my camera doesn't really do them justice. That green color is a lot more saturated and it really pops. These PCBs look awesome. Yeah, this is definitely a better option for some retro cards. Colors are quite tricky to get correctly on camera, because you have to get the white balance settings perfectly set. And that's not an easy thing to do, at least not with my old camera. So you're just gonna have to take my word for it. These boards look amazing. Let's build one up. So I'm not going to talk about every single component, because we have already built a couple of these in a previous video. And this video is going to be more a comparison and see how this card looks in matte green PCB. Okay, I installed some resistors and skipped ahead here, and I can already tell this is my new favorite PCB. This is going to look amazing. I'm going to use these green PCBs for all my retro builds from now on. That is for sure. Let's do some sockets next. So the original card doesn't have any sockets, and it would probably look a lot nicer without them. Kind of feels wrong building a brand new PCB without sockets. Maybe I'll build one up without. Actually, let's build this one up without sockets. I know it's all wrong, but I want to see how it looks. All the parts I'm using for this card are brand new parts from Mauser, so the risk of getting a bad chip is absolutely minimal. Well, all the components except two, because two of the chips are obsolete. But they are cheap and easy to find on eBay. Next up we have the two obsolete chips I mentioned. The Yamaha Y3014B and the magic chip that makes that perfect Monkey Island sound. The Yamaha YM3812. I checked just a few months ago and they are still cheap and readily available at AliExpress and eBay. And these two chips are tested, by the way. Okay, all the ICs are soldered, and that felt really weird. I can't recall the last time I soldered ICs directly on a PCB without using sockets. I'll probably put this one on display and build the remaining cards with sockets. Now let's install some tantalums. You don't really need any instructions to build one of these cards, because all the values are clearly marked on the PCB. Okay, we're almost done here. Only one thing left to install, and that's the most expensive part of this entire build. The stupid Born's pots. So if you're building one of these on a budget, you can replace that expensive pot with just a regular resistor. And of course you won't be able to adjust the volume. I actually have a couple of these cards with the 6.2K resistor installed instead of the Born's pot. And that makes the output quite close to regular low level. Perfect for most speakers and amplifiers. Unfortunately, the green color just doesn't look right on camera. Let me see if I can adjust the white balance. No, not even with a gray card. I need to save up for a better camera. The only downside to a matte PCB is that you can't do a sloppy job when you clean up the flux, because the flux is glossy, but it's not difficult to clean up, so it's not really an issue. Actually, there are also some optional pads here for cheaper pots, like I've used on this card here. And on one of my cards, I just bodged a trim pot. That way I can adjust the volume to perfect low level, and then just leave it. I ordered some plain brackets from Mauser and drilled some holes. One for that Born's pot and the other one for the audio jack. I'll install it and wash this board. And I'll get back to this card when it's time to test the IBM. Okay, all the bits and pieces are back from the wash. Nice and clean and dry and ready for reassembly. Before we can put the lid back on, we need to replace these nasty little reefers. And these are 0.1 micro X2 caps. I went through my stash and I found these. The lid spacing isn't quite correct, but let's see if we can make them fit anyways. Okay, this board actually has two sets of through holes. It's actually not an uncommon thing when replacing reefers, so all we need to do is to bend the legs just a tiny bit and they will fit just fine on this PCB. Unfortunately, I didn't have replacements for all the tantalums, but at least we won't have a nasty reefer smell in the studio. Aside from the two reefers here, I never had any issues with power supplies in 5150s or 5160s, so they seem to be pretty well made with good components. And in this case here they are Nichicons. Not a guarantee to be good, but in this case they definitely are. So as I just mentioned, I don't have all the tantalum caps, so I can't replace them today, but what we can do is to check for shorts. So if we measure across all the tantalum caps here, we should have nothing, or at least about 50 ohms. And we're getting mega ohms, or absolutely nothing on all the caps. So I don't think this board is going to blow up today, and I will of course order a full set of caps and replace them, hopefully before they blow up. Okay, next up we have the Hercules card, and this is actually not a regular Hercules card. This is actually a GB112, and that is a Hercules Graphics Card Plus. It's an enhanced card from 1986, adding support for redefinable fonts called RAM font. I've actually had to repair 3 of my Hercules cards, and they all had the same fault. One of the RAM chips had gone bad, so that seems to be a very common fault on these cards. We are going to test this card, but we're not going to use it for this build. I'm going to install it in a slightly newer machine, and instead we're going to use this period correct original Hercules card. This is one of the cards we have repaired on the channel, so I have all the RAM chips in socket here. And since I replaced those RAM chips, this card has been working perfectly. To me, Hercules Graphics is the perfect match for a 5150. And next up we have the Quad RAM quad board. Very similar to the more famous AST 6-pack Plus. Not sure who copied who here. It has a clock and a serial port and 6 banks of RAM. This card is period correct, so it gets to stay in this machine. And same thing here. I need to order a set of tantalums, so I'm just going to quickly check and make sure they aren't shorted already. So we're getting 130 ohms. 130 ohms. And same thing here. So these guys are not shorted yet. Okay, our weird little Varta Safetronic here doesn't have the usual footprint. So I had to modify the battery blaster. I soldered the diode lead at one end and a short wire on the other end. I cleaned up the only trace that was damaged on this side. And now we can install the battery blaster like so. Then I can solder this wire on the negative side instead of the battery. I think this should work. And here's the final result. Looks pretty decent to me. This is definitely good enough. And a lot safer than using a leaky Varda battery. The floppy controller only has 2 tantalums, but that's enough to create quite a lot of magic smoke. So let's check them. Okay, 39 ohms and 39 ohms. That's not much, but I think that's enough. And hopefully they will last until I receive my new caps. I checked all the tantalums on both drives and ordered a set for a complete replacement. And these boards have one 0.68 micro cap here. And then it has 8 4.7 micro 16 volt caps. If you have watched some of my previous videos, you know exactly what is going to happen to these caps. Unless we replace them. Here goes. Oh, damn! Yeah, this drive is okay too, at least for now. Before we test this drive, I'm going to remove this cap here and place 1 drop of machine oil on this bearing here and put the cap back on. And I'm going to place 1 drop of machine oil on the 2 rails. The next step is a bit tricky to get on camera, but down here we have access to both bearings on the stepper motor, 1 on each side. So I'm going to put 1 drop of machine oil on each side, and hopefully it will find its way inside the bearings. The most important thing when servicing these drives is to grease the front door, and if you don't, it will break. These are plastic parts, so I'm using PTFE. Just a tiny splash should be enough. Okay, and we're finally ready to start testing stuff. Let's start with the motherboard, the graphics card, and the power supply. Here it goes. The fan spun up. Oh, I forgot to add a speaker. Okay, we've got a parity error. Wow, that sucks. Okay, so unfortunately we have a RAM issue here. Let's make sure that this error isn't caused by the switch block being set for a lot more RAM than the board had. So I installed the RAM expansion card for the next test. Here goes. No, still parity check. So I think we have a faulty RAM chip on this board. Okay, I removed all the RAM chips from the third bank. And I have set the dip switches accordingly. So they are now correctly set for having RAM on bank 0, 1 and 2. No, still parity check 1. Oh crap. Okay, so I'll remove the RAM chips from bank 2 and we'll try again. Okay, said and done. I also changed the switch block, but unfortunately that didn't help. Well, I guess I'll remove the chips in bank 1. Okay, here goes with bank 0 only, and the remaining chips are soldered to the board. Okay, we're getting some other errors. Well, I guess that makes sense. Parity error 1 with the bad chip in bank 1. Okay, let's do the next test with the floppy controller and the 2 drives. Okay, drive A is making some noises, but we're still getting a 1055-201 error. Let me check this one. Okay, I did some reading, and that may actually be a known bug. The BIOS revision I have installed on this motherboard requires RAM chips installed in all 4 banks. And if one of the banks is missing chips, we would get that error. So I borrowed a full set of RAM chips from another motherboard and installed here. Let's see if that helps. We've got a cursor, and it went into IBM Basic without any errors. Awesome. Okay, so we seem to have 1 or more faulty RAM chips in bank 1. So I'll put the original chips back in, but I will skip the chips from bank 1 for now. Okay, I installed the original chips in bank 2 and 3, and then I swapped the chips in bank 1, one at a time, until I got an error. This board had no less than 3 bad RAM chips. I find it a bit weird that it had all 3 bad chips in the same bank, but that's what we have. And the board now boots into IBM Basic without any errors. Okay, so the next test is the floppy drives. Let's reboot with the DOS floppy in the drive. It's roaring, but it didn't boot. Huh. Okay, in that case, let's try with a cleaning disk. I'll run it a couple of times to clean those heads. Actually, it's not spinning up, so something is wrong here. Let's try with some deoxit and the ISA slot and the edge connector for the floppy cable. Let's give the edge connectors at the back of the drive the same treatment and try again. Well, I can hear the stepper motor moving, but it's not spinning up. Huh. Yeah, I could clearly see the stepper motor move, but the motor isn't spinning. So unfortunately, I think this drive might be bad. Let's try with a different controller. Heads moved, but drive is not spinning up. Oh crap, I've got a bad drive. Okay, I'll swap that drive. This drive spins up. Configuration too large for memory. Okay, it seems we don't have enough RAM to run DOS. Well, in that case, let's test that RAM expansion card next. Here goes. I installed the RAM card and changed the switch block for 448K. And it seems to be busy counting up all that RAM. The 5150 does a RAM check, but it doesn't show it on the screen. Okay, the floppy drive spun up, and we're in DOS. Awesome. So the RAM expansion card is working too. So I guess the next test is the second floppy drive. So let's load up a game from that drive. And it's loading the game. And it totally works. Awesome. Prince of Persia looks a bit funny with Hercules graphics. It gets all compressed. Sort of like a widescreen image. And it loaded up the game successfully. Okay, so that drive is definitely good. And that of course brings us to the sound card. I washed the card and installed the brackets. And this card looks stunning. If there was a competition for nicest looking sound card, I think this card would win. It's a bit of a shame to hide it away inside the machine. So I'm going to keep one of these on display. But the question remains, does it actually work? Let's give it a try. Actually, before we test that sound card, let's do some more tests with the floppy drive. So now I have swapped the PCB and installed the PCB from the good drive in the drive that doesn't spin up. Let's turn that machine on and see what happens. Step removed, but it doesn't spin up, so the fault is probably not on the main PCB. But there is also this small PCB attached at the back of the drive here. So I'll swap it with a board from a known good drive. Actually, there is something strange going on with this board. The screw installed on this side here was pretty heavily corroded. And same thing with the legs on these components. There is corrosion on all the components on this entire side here. So something bad has happened here. So let's start by doing a test with a known good PCB. Okay, here goes. Oh, now it spins. Okay, so I think we have found our issue here. It's definitely this board. And it loaded up DOS right away. Well, I think it's kind of obvious what happened here. So we've got some corrosion in this area here. And electrolytic caps. And this side of the board too has some mild corrosion on the traces. So let's add some flux to the legs of those two caps. And then I'll add some fresh solder. And the solder is making funny bubbles. Well, this leg here isn't too keen to take solder. Let's see if that was enough to remove the solder with the desoldering gun. Well, not quite. The solder is quite heavily corroded, so it's not coming off easily. So let's add more flux and try again. Okay, and one of the caps fell off. And the other one too. So let's clean this up and inspect. Okay, the pads are unfortunately damaged. Let's see if we can fix it anyways. Okay, So the only pad that survived is this one here. These pads are completely gone. They left with the solder, but this is a single layer board. So as long as we connect the legs of the caps to the nearby traces here, we should be able to fix this, because they're not connected to anything else inside the board. And if this had been a multi-layer board, this would have been a really big problem. There's actually a third cap here. It's not leaking, but we might as well just replace it. The cap that isn't leaking is Nichicon. And my other drives have Nichicon caps too, but the two leaky caps are another brand. And they are bulging quite heavily underneath, so definitely leaky caps. So we have a 1 micro 50 volt cap here, and these two are 47 micro 25 volt caps. I removed the solder mask on the traces with an abrasive rubber tip, and now I'm going to bend the leads of the caps here and make sure they connect to where they should on the PCB. Let's start with the easy one first, the only surviving pad of the 4, and then I'm going to bend this lead down so it connects to the leg of the other cap, but it also has to make connection to this trace here that continues in this direction. So I added some flux and then solder, and now we can cut this lead off. And the last one is a bit trickier because it needs to connect to both sides here, but the actual pad is missing. So I'm gonna have to bend this lead in 2 directions. Okay, so I have bent this leg here in this direction, and then I bend it back up and up this way. So with some luck here it will make a connection with both of these traces. So let's add some flux and solder, like so. Now let's clean that flux up and inspect. I think we got all the connections we need. So this leg here needs to connect to this leg, which it does, and then it also continues this way and connects to this pin. And this leg here needs to connect to this pad, which it does, and then it continues to this pad here, and it's connected too. Awesome. We also need to fix this corrosion here so it doesn't get worse. That is fixed with some flux, fresh solder and heat. Okay, the original PCB reinstalled in the drive. Here goes. Step removed, but unfortunately the motor isn't spinning, so we still have an issue with this PCB. Okay, so the nasty little caps seems to have killed something else on this board. Let's see if we can figure out which component it is. As far as I can tell, the corrosion has only affected this part of the circuitry here. I'm not going to check the exact values here. Okay, so we've got 1K on this resistor, and L1 here should be close to 0. Well, it's jumping around between 1 and 10 ohms, so it's probably okay too. And then we have a cap here. Same thing here. I'm not going to check the exact values here because it's in circuit, but it looks like it's charging or discharging, so that cap is probably okay too. And R16 here I think is a 0 ohm resistor. Well, it's jumping around a bit between 4 and 20 ohms, so that resistor is probably okay too. Let's check these two. 2 ohms, 600 ohms, 600 ohms, and about 2 ohms. So these are probably fine too. So I'm gonna place my bets on this transistor here. Okay, and this guy here is a 2N4124. It's an NPN general purpose amplifier. Let's test it in a component tester. Oh, this is hard to see on camera, but it's recognized as a BJT NPN. So that component is probably good. Okay, well, in that case, maybe the damage isn't caused by the corrosion, but the lack of working caps. So my next bet is the LM2917. I don't have a way of testing it, so I just installed the socket and swapped it. Here goes. Oh, and it spun up. So it was that LM2917. It reads the disk and it boots. Awesome. Okay, 3 bad RAM chips, 2 caps, and 1 LM2917. That was actually a good fault to have because these are still available. I have already placed one in my Mauser cart. So pretty good faults and easy to repair. I'll reassemble the machine and then we'll test out that gorgeous sound card. Before we can call this project finished, we are of course going to overclock it. So I'll remove the 8284, which was luckily installed in a socket, and instead I'm going to install a skinny sprint. If this is new to you, you can find a whole bunch of videos about this project on this channel. And this skinny sprint has a 22.11 MHz crystal. So divided by 3, it's going to increase the speed from the original 4.77 to 7.37. That's a massive speed increase. And at this speed, these boards tend to run really well without any major issues. Okay, the final test. I hope. I ended up doing one more upgrade and installed some more RAM. So this machine is now running 640K, making it pretty much perfect. Now let's check out those glorious Hercules graphics and hopefully the matching green AdLib card. That's a bit loud, and it totally works. Awesome. Camera is of course overexposing those neat Hercules graphics. Okay, project successful, and if you have a 5150, 5160 or 5162, you may want to check out the PCB on the back of your drives. Perhaps replace those 2 caps before they kill any other components on the drive. And that's all I have for you guys today. Before you leave, like, subscribe and leave a comment, and consider joining me on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys again next week.